Good evening. We'd like to call to order the January 28th, 2013 meeting of the Canby Planning Commission. Today we have one particular item of business plus general business. So we'll call this meeting to order. And the first, I'm going to take the chairman's prerogative to add item 1A here after call to order. We have one of our planning commissioners who is participating with the wonders of technology by video and by phone today. And so because he's ill, we have the request, and I'll pass it to the commission, to allow that person to participate by video conference. For the public, you will note that we have the cameras around the room, and the camera is also on anybody presenting testimony, so it will be just as if the other commission member is up here with us for all intents and purposes. You'll want to speak up, but should not interfere with anybody's ability to be heard. Is there any discussion about this by the rest of the commission?
No problem with that.
Only thing I would say is maybe if we could call John and make sure that he actually can hear us and is getting everything at this time, as opposed to, TV isn't working or something along those lines.
I can do that while you go ahead and run your business here.
Okay. So if there's no objection, I'd entertain a motion to allow Mr. Proctor to participate as much as possible, assuming he can fully participate.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It was unanimous. Thank you, Brian. If you could give him a quick call. Okay. We might have a little bit of a break here until he gets on the line, to make sure he's on the line. We have the second item of business, which is citizen input on non-agenda items. Is there any general citizen input tonight? Okay. Not hearing any. Let's wait for if you guys
So
can.
he's not. His phone number out here.
If you guys can call him and check with us on that, I'll start with the format explanation here and recitals, and then we can go on to the hearing. So today we have a public hearing. The applicant is proposing a 6-unit fuel dispenser station, which includes a canopy, underground fuel storage tanks, an attendant kiosk, equipment kiosk, restroom, dumpster, storage shed, propane fueling station, and an air water pad, known as DR 12.0-03. It is a public hearing, so I'm going to read the public hearing format requirements. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please step forward to the microphone, state your name, address, interest in the matter. You may be limited by time for your statement, depending on how many people wish to testify. The order in which we'll hear testimony will be the staff report, any questions from the commission to staff, and then we'll have open public hearing for testimony. First from the applicant, then from the proponents, and then a rebuttal by the applicant. Then we'll close public hearing and open it for commission deliberation and potentially any questions that the commission would have. Everyone that's here is encouraged to testify, even if it's only to concur with previous testimony. All questions should be directed through the chair. Any evidence must be submitted to the hearings body for public access. All written testimony previously received, both for and against the application, shall be summarized by the staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable approval criteria listed in the comprehensive plan and in our code, potentially on the wall too, as it says here. Failure to raise an issue slaps the hand of the chair when his phone rings.
It's just go silent.
I apologize. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker, this commission, the opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure to raise other issues can have a detrimental effect. You can read more on that. Constitutional or other issues, any issue at all, can have a detrimental effect if you chose to appeal this somewhere. So at this time, I'll ask the members of the commission if there's anyone that has a conflict of interest, any bias, or any reason that they should not be participating in tonight's hearing.
I do not.
No conflict.
No conflict here. Brian, did we get?
He did not answer, so I
Okay,
just left
so
a
we'll go
message
Sans.
that
Okay.
you wanted to make sure that he was able to view.
Is there anyone in the audience that would present some sort of conflict of interest by any of the commission members? Not seeing any, we'll move forward. First on the hearing format would be staff report.
Actually, the first item on the agenda is to see if there's any citizen input on.
We did that while you're on the phone.
Okay, I wasn't paying attention, I'm sorry.
It's all right, my phone rang.
Great.
Ready for the staff report?
We are.
Okay, good evening, commissioners. Tonight you have the site and design review for application for Fred Meyer Fuel Facility before you. This is a type 3 site and design review application with final approval by the Planning Commission unless appealed. The previous type 4 application that received final approval from council concerning the downtown overlay zone boundary is currently under appeal to LUBA, and we'll go over that as a condition of approval a little bit later. And for new members, it's okay if you're not completely familiar with the specifics of that file, but just know that there was a boundary change to allow a more auto-oriented use, such as a fuel station at this site. A traffic study was required and conducted by the applicant. The city's traffic engineer reviewed and commented on the study, and we'll discuss more as I go over the conditions of approval, his specific comments and recommendation. Agency and public comments received are the following: comment from city consulting engineers, city consulting traffic engineers, comments from Canby Utility Board, Canby Public Works, Northwest Natural, City of Canby Environmental Services Coordinator, Canby Transit, stated concerns over conflicts with the bus stops. All the other previous listings were just had some general design recommendations or no issue. Canby Fire District stated no issue. 2 citizen comment forms in favor. Canby Telecom did submit a written comment after the packet was made. Stated standard procedural tasks that the applicant will have to go through to obtain service from Canby Telecom. A comment form and letter from the owner of Hulbert's Flowers stating concerns over traffic. Testimony from the opponent's attorney, testimony from the opponent's traffic engineer, testimony from the applicant's attorney. And to the greatest extent possible, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later, but public and agency testimony was incorporated and taken into consideration when we drafted up the recommended conditions of approval. And so usually I just go, what I do for new members, I go over some code interpretation items to ensure that the commission concurs, or if they want to discuss about that, and then we'll go over the conditions of approval one by one. Okay, so the proposed development is located at 99 Ian Locust. It is this this site right here. It's zoned C2 highway commercial. It's also in the downtown overlay zone, but in the outer highway commercial portion of the downtown overlay zone, pending final approval at the Land Use Board of Appeals level. The applicant is proposing a 6-unit fuel dispenser station with accompanying buildings. some miscellaneous items. There is existing curbs abutting the site. There's an existing 8-foot sidewalk along the north and a 5-foot sidewalk to the east and the south. There's an existing driveway right here that the applicant proposes to close and connect the two existing sidewalks on either side in this driveway area right here. City access standards have been met. Driveway standards from distance from the driveway to intersections are met along 2nd Avenue. The applicant has obtained permission to put in a driveway here from ODOT. Setback, height, vision clearance, lot coverage requirements have been met in the proposal. And so one big thing is that since they are potentially in the outer highway commercial portion of the downtown overlay zone, they're still in the overlay zone though, and there's a lot of design standards in that overlay zone, but the Planning Commission has the discretion to approve alternative designs in that overlay zone. So there's a lot of design standards about floor area ratio, setbacks, decorative features, architectural bays, a lot of stuff that would really apply to a building. But since they're not really proposing any buildings except an attendant kiosk and a restroom and a storage shed, we're proposing that those standards would not apply to that.
Angie,
Yes.
can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes.
Since this is my first public hearing as chair, and we have 2 new commission members, do you prefer that we, just in general, do you prefer that we wait questions till the end? I know in the past we've done it more interactive during your staff report, and we can go either way.
You're the chair and you're the commission, so I would say it's up to whatever the commission.
You don't have a preference? Okay. But let me,
Commission's preference.
let me be the first one to interrupt you with a question. I think you just stated that the applicant had proposed to close that particular driveway.
Yes.
In reading through the packet, it seemed as if that was one of the conditions of approval that the city traffic engineer and staff had recommended as a condition of approval.
Just to reiterate it, and to reiterate that we didn't receive engineering, construction drawings for that, so we just want to have the engineer look at
So was
final
it
construction.
both they wanted to do it and we're recommending doing it as a condition of
Yes.
approval? Or- oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It might be overkill, but,
Okay.
okay. So all of these, all of the details about interpreting and fitting this into the outer highway commercial area of the overlay zone are gone over in more detail in the staff report, but feel free to ask if you want me to talk about that some more. So one thing, we would like some direction, or a couple of things here we'd like some direction on, is their proposed monument sign up abutting 99. Our code says the base and top shall be constructed of stone, brick, or wood. And this is their proposed sign, so we don't see like a frame around it. And it does have out in the code where Planning Commission, Planning Director has discretion to approve alternative designs. So, I mean, what the code is going for, I'm assuming, is some sort of frame like this sign. So I think that's an item for Planning Commission discussion if you think this proposed monument sign should have a frame all the way around. And if not, you can waive that. So, okay, the sign code interpretations. So our sign code has a maximum on the primary and secondary frontages. So the primary would be along 99, and the secondary would be any other frontages around, facing any other streets. says for a wall sign, which we're saying that these signs on the canopy are wall signs. The primary frontage or the maximum square footage of sign should be 8%, it says 8% of the building area. So this area, this side here is 322 square feet, so multiply that by 8%. 76 square foot is allowed. I'm sorry, 25, approximately 25.7 square foot is allowed, and these are kind of approximate measurements, because a lot of these signs, the code's not specific how to measure. If it's just letters, this one you can measure because it has a definite boundary. But anyways, approximately these areas add up to approximately 41 square feet, and then the same reasoning on the other frontages is allows 6%. So they're okay on this frontage, a little high on this one. So overall, their maximum square footage for each face, if you want to interpret the sign code as saying the frontage is these canopies, then they're a little bit over the square footage, but they're not, if you add up all 4 of the sides of the canopy, then they're not over. So it's kind of one of those things that's kind of difficult to interpret if they meet or not. So I think that could be something that you guys could weigh in on. And then it also says in the code that 1 sign per building frontage is allowed for, so it would that could mean that only 1 of these would be allowed, not this one and this one. So, but again, they don't exceed the maximum. If you added up all 4 sides, they don't exceed that. So we can talk about this some more if that's unclear. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we'd like some input on their signs and what you think. The design review matrix, there's a lot of items in it that this is one of the things that we made major revisions to in our code revisions that we just, that you guys just recommended for approval to council. But right now we're working with the old one, and so we had, in order to have the development pass, we had to interpret it that some of these were not applicable, and really some of these items in this table aren't. For example, disconnecting downspouts, it's not applicable because there's no existing buildings. Rooftop structures are not applicable because they don't have a building that could accommodate that. So there's a lot of creativeness, I guess you could say, but I think that the way we interpreted it, and hopefully it meets the intent. And there was a calculation error in the staff report, but the way we interpreted it and calculated it out, the applicant does pass the table without any rounding required. We found that they earned 29 points and 5.55 low impact development points, and those are enough to pass the table. So again, ask me if you want to.
Yeah, well, what did the totals end up being? Because that stuck out at me that there was point
Yeah.
something.
So, yeah. We have 29 that they earned, and 29 earned, 37 total possible. And for the LID points, we have 6 earned, 10 possible.
So with the 37 total possible,
That would, 70% is 25.9 points,
okay.
and they have 29 points. And then 15% for LID would be 5.55.
Okay, so the center down.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions right now? Okay. So now I'm going to go over conditions of approval. For new members, these are what you really should pay attention to. When you are considering an application, you have basically you have three options. You can approve with conditions, or deny. So, and most of the time, we recommend approving with conditions. And your decisions are based on your submitted materials, the materials in your packet, and based on oral testimony. So we are recommending approval of this design review application with the following conditions, and these are on page 28 and 29 of your staff report if you want to flip to there. We do have some proposed rewording of some of the conditions, basically for more specificity at the request. After some discussions with the applicant, we just want to make them more very specific, what we're asking for. And so how that works is for the new commissioners, if you make a decision tonight, then we would come back with a final document called Final Findings at the next meeting, which would have everything discussed and any revisions to the conditions of approval tonight. Final decision. So there's still one more step in the process. So. Okay, so the first condition of approval is talking about the driveway along Locust, and this is just basically a condition recommended by our city engineer, so that's why it's included. And the applicant, like you said, was proposing it anyways, but we just want to make sure that the final sidewalk design is approved by the city, which that means we'll show it to our engineer and make sure it's structurally sound and ADA compliant and up to par. Second condition of approval, we have a little bit of rewording in italics. We propose to add that at the end. That's basically the legally correct way of saying it, but the zone change text amendment file that was previously approved by City Council about the boundary, that needs to be upheld, that needs to be determined to be final with no further rights of appeal. And right now, it's under appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. So that needs to be taken care of, and so that's a condition of approval. Number 3, and I think the applicant will be presenting some a modification to their design, but our code states that any vehicle maneuvering area should be set back 15 feet from the front lot line. And then I think if they're going to be proposing a different setback, that might alter some of the landscaping. So I just put in if you're going to alter that setback, it just still needs to meet the required number of trees in the front, and doesn't affect the landscaping percentages overall. The next one, we added just this to make it more specific. In our sign chapter, talks about any sign shouldn't result in glare. And then I just said per the standard of this. I think it might have actually been a mistake in the staff report. It said per the above.
Angie, we don't
Standard.
have these changed to the conditions of approval in our packets,
No,
right?
no, this is,
It's gonna be in this thing.
it's in the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay, great.
And
Yeah.
also, we have there on page 8. where she-
Yeah, but they changed.
She's going right through, down through there. This is what she's talking about right now.
But you're not gonna see 14
These were
in
some
there.
changes. These were changes.
Right.
Some of the numbering of the conditions are going to be different too, because there's been one or two added as well, and so the numbers are going to change and won't correspond either.
okay, condition 5. I don't think we changed any words to that. That's the same. Yeah, that's the same. No changes to condition 5. Talking about the canopy lights, can't really tell for sure on the proposed drawings that they are up in the canopy or shielded. So we just want to make sure that those lights don't glare into those residential areas abutting the site. So that's what that condition's about. There's no changes in this one. Sorry, it does say proposed rewording, but no changes. Coordinate the development with ODOT, which they are doing. But we just want to specify to coordinate everything with ODOT. So there's no changes to that. Proposed new condition on number 8, it's not exactly new, but it just specifies all applicable utility agencies that this development, all the utility agencies have their own rules and standards, and this probably doesn't even need to be in the conditions, but we put it in to state that if you want utility service from these people, you're going to have to do what they want. So that's just making that hopefully very clear that these agencies have all their own rules that you're going to have to go through. So that's what that one is stating. Being more specific about Public Works design standards, that's so if the engineer is looking at the final sidewalk design, we have Public Work design standards that guide that regarding engineering level details. So that's why we proposed just to be more specific, added that in there.
That pertains to the stormwater.
Yep, that would talk about stormwater too.
Okay.
This one, again, just to be extra and very more specific, talks about complying with the requests from agencies and can be public work representatives that submitted design recommendations. And then we list each agency and person and the date of their comment to help just be crystal clear what we're talking about. Let's see. This one is a rewording of basically rewords number 8, talking about easements for electrical service, and we added in as indicated by Gary Stockwell's comments dated X/2/21/12. That actually might be the wrong date. I need to double check that. There was a comment from the Canby Utility Board about trees not interfering with the overhead power lines, so we need to make sure that the trees are still okay with our landscape ordinances, but have our city arborists look at them as well. So that's what that one is. And then we added some more specifics about stormwater. Just basically very elaborating everything that was in the staff report.
And your question on
Yep.
number 10, back a couple slides. I'm not sure that this is a problem, but the language that was in there made my eyes perk up, where it says, "The development shall comply with design requests from agencies." To me, that is almost like a blank check. And I was concerned, I mean, I have no idea what could come up under that. I don't have anything in particular, but I thought, okay, shall comply with all design requests from agencies. I can imagine there might not be always be agreement on that.
Right. And I think there was some discussion if one of the requests, one or more, was not accurate. We can talk about.
That's okay, okay. We
It
can
might
talk
be
about
better if we just stated that comply with the design statements within these comment forms that we received. So nothing else,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not promising anything else other than that was written on the comment form.
And that's why we added in the other one about the development shall comply with standards of all applicable outside utility agencies. Because by all means, the comments on these forms is not everything that these utility agencies are going to require.
That makes, so there's 6 reports, the following 6. The following 6 design requests, or following 6 design comments. Okay, well, we can work on that during discussion. I just wanted
Okay.
to ask you a question about that.
So I'm not going to read over word for word that one about stormwater management, but it basically states what our Canby Public Works design standards talks about with stormwater management, and basically saying that stormwater needs to stay on site and not into a public storm system, because our public stormwater system is at capacity. So and so this one, we did say in the conditions of approval, talking about Chris Majeski, DKS, on condition 10B. We stated Chris Majeski, DKS, consulting traffic engineer, comply with his design requests, recommendations, whatever wording we're going to decide on, but it might help address if we actually take out his condition about the right-in, right-out only restriction, and future ODOT monitoring. That's word for word his recommended condition of approval there. And we did talk some more with ODOT. They're okay with it. It would help address some of the Holbert's Flowers concerns, and some degree can be transit concerns about conflicting with their bus stops. It might mitigate that sometime in the future, although any development on the site, I think, is going to has a potential to conflict with bus stops.
Brian, wasn't Weren't they looking at redoing the bus routes and bus stops anyways, or had they already conducted that and completed that?
Well, there's probably a continual evaluation, but because of the fairly recent significant downsizing that they had to do, their routes have been set.
Okay.
And so the new set does include a bus stop about midway on this tract on 2nd Avenue, one on both sides of 2nd Avenue. There's a bus stop for each direction, I guess. And then there's one right at the intersection on Highway 99, just before you get to Locust Street, heading towards Oregon City. So they pull up right in front of this lot towards, and load there. And as far as I can tell, there's, the driveway's further on down, and so they're not stopping in front of the driveway. But it does kind of lend the thought that I wonder if there's a conflict there. There's always a conflict when the bus stops on the highway. But whether there's more conflict because now there's cars coming in and out of this new development on this site is the question.
Yeah, if I chose that.
So, it's possible that through time, and the way this condition's worded, that if it really does pose a problem, they may find a better location to have their bus stop, or any of, other things may happen as well. But this is getting at the idea that ODOT has approved the driveway at this location. It's a shared driveway with adjacent property. ODOT permitted it, and they fully support a condition that would require them to have an opportunity to evaluate it after experience of a year, and if necessary, due to unusual number of crashes or queuing problems that cause problems on the highway, that they'd be able to restrict the driveway at that time. And from a conversation that I had just a couple of days ago with ODOT official indicating their support, should you want to include this as a condition of approval, they indicated that a future right restriction on this driveway, right in and right out, would almost, he didn't say absolutely, would almost assuredly result in a median placed in the highway as well.
And I think one other topic for conversation is the condition being placed on the property such that it carries from one owner to the other. The wording says should. It could be shall, if you think. And that would be some sort of statement on the deed that we would have to work out as staff. But that wording could definitely, it can be changed from should to shall if you think that might be something that would be necessary. I think, as it stands now, if you're going to say should, then it probably won't happen.
So shall or will would be a better,
Yeah.
stronger term.
Yeah. And so finally, at the end, there's just some procedural conditions before they actually start construction, getting building permits, and then I think the two additional conditions the Planning Commission could consider is having a frame around the monument sign, and if the sign sizes need to be decreased. And with that, I will take any questions.
Anybody on the commission have any questions?
I do not.
Angie, I have one.
Yes.
I'll start, get the conversation going here. Page 16 of the staff report, we have, I lost my page 16. We have the definitions of the sign frontages. Oh, here we go. 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet, 13 feet, 14 feet, 15 feet, 16 feet, 17 feet, 18 feet, 19 feet, 20 feet, 21 feet, 22 feet, 23 feet, 24 feet, 25 feet, 26 feet, 27 feet, 28 feet, 29 feet, 30 feet, 31 feet, 32 feet, 33 feet, 34 feet, 35 feet, 36 feet, 37 feet, 38 feet, 39 feet, 40 feet, 41 feet, 42 feet, 43 feet, 44 feet, 45 feet, 46 feet, 47 feet, 48 feet, 49 feet, 50 feet, 51 feet, 52 feet, 53 feet, 54 feet, 55 feet, 56 feet, 57 feet, 58 feet, 59 feet, 60 feet, 61 feet, 62 feet And when I look at the code, I'm wondering, I don't know if you want to go back to any of those pictures or not, but where it said the maximum sign face area of a wall signage allowed on a primary building frontage. Then the next part of the code down below that's the building elevation area. When I look those up in our code, they seems to me that, for instance, on building frontage primary, it says the ground floor lineal length of a building wall that faces a street, driveway, parking lot. To me, and it appeared from the size of the signs, I didn't see your mathematical calculation, but it appeared from the size of the signs that we were only counting the actual physical portions of that eave
Right.
as the wall face. And
Yeah.
under our definitions, it looks like it's from the floor
Yeah.
up to the top. And I'm not sure if you disagreed with that when you calculated, or how that came into.
I just
calendar.
used the canopy. You know, I think the code doesn't really take into account a canopy.
Yeah.
So if it went all the way to the ground and the signs were this size, then it would be fine.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Angie? Okay, let's move on to the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Lee Layton, and I am with Westlake Consultants. My address is in the record. Do you need me to sign in on the sheet? Was that a yes? Okay. Okay. So here to make our presentation this evening and to answer any questions you may have, I mentioned I'm Lee Layton from Westlake. I do land use planning work. Jim Combs is here from Fred Meyer, sitting right behind me. Jake Tate, just off my left shoulder, is the design engineer from Great Basin Engineering South, and Brent Arend in the back row is our traffic engineer, and attorney Steve Abel from Stoll Reeves is also here. So we're not all going to take turns making presentation, but rest assured, whatever questions you have, we're prepared to respond to them so you can get the information that you need. Also, I want to thank the city staff for all the courtesies they've shown us in the review process. Needless to say, there's a lot of dialogue and communication that goes on in getting a proposal like this before you, and they've been very helpful to us in that process, and I want to acknowledge all of their help, including loading our PowerPoint presentation for this evening. And let me give you copies that you can have to write notes on and turn pages and so forth. And I have a favor to ask of you, since we don't yet have name tags for the new members of your panel. It would be helpful to me in potentially responding to questions to know the names of the planning commissioners on the ends.
Not the new ones yet?
Well, I've got Mr. Smith in the middle, Mr. Joyce and Savory, Kocher and Hensley.
That's it.
Okay, so there are empties, but there are empty spots. And I'll go back to remedial counting, so. All right. The first thing, and I know this has been covered in the staff report already, before this matter came up for design review, there was our proposal to make a change in the downtown Canby overlay sub-area boundaries. That matter went up to the City Council, and the City Council approved it and approved that ordinance going back to December 5th now. And so in the current context, here's our pointer. As you look at the site map here, this location where the proposed fuel store is located is now in the outer highway commercial sub-area of the downtown Canby overlay zone. And what's interesting is that the downtown Canby overlay zone in fact covers the entire Highway 99 corridor all the way through town. But it has three sub-areas. This central, the brown area here, is the central core commercial, CC core commercial area. That's really where your downtown is. These sort of shoulders to the north are called transitional commercial, and there's a mix of residential and commercial uses in there that's very distinctive and can be, and it's got its own protections. And then the outer highway commercial extends all the way along the highway in both directions. And that's important because this site is at the boundary, but these outer highway commercial standards of the downtown Canby overlay apply as much as a half a mile or a mile away from the core area. And in talking about that, the code prioritizes the uses that are allowed under the base zoning. So for example, in this instance, the base zoning of the property allows the fuel station as a regular allowed use. The outer highway commercial design standards set the stage for high quality development, but not for prohibiting that fundamentally allowed underlying use. And that's very clear in your code. The purpose of the downtown Canby overlay is not to disallow uses that are allowed by the basic zoning. What it is allowed to do is, what it is intended to do is improve the quality of the development that occurs consistent with that base zoning. So that said, when the team met with the staff, this property had been in the core commercial area, and the observation was it may make sense, the most sense, to propose for it to be in the outer highway commercial. We made the case for that. And then to use the outer highway commercial design standards to review the development. So I know that's a heavy, more recap perhaps than you wanted, but I want to ask at this juncture, are there any questions about how this panel should proceed in terms of what the city's policy is with respect to this property?
If you have an opinion on how you think we should proceed, go ahead and state it. Otherwise, let's just keep on to your presentation.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, I think it's clear that the city has made it its policy that this property is in the outer highway commercial, and those are the standards that apply. And that's what's in your staff report and in our supporting documentation. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is take just a minute to talk about the conditions, since that's fresh in everyone's mind, because we have just a couple of observations we'd like to make. On condition number 3, Jake Tate will, in his presentation, explain a new proposal for the landscaping along Highway 99, where we've moved away from having it just be a straight line parallel to the highway and having a more curving, flexible relationship. And we think that it completely meets this requirement that the landscape maintain an average of 15 feet along that frontage. So we're kind of using an averaging thing there, and it's not a hard minimum at 15 feet. So this, this condition in this form, I think, is very satisfactory to us. I want to just say that. And then jumping down to, there was a lot of discussion of what is now condition 10, that recites the memos or comments that were submitted by different agencies. And I want you to know that I've I've walked through those item by item with our engineer, Jake Tate, and we've discussed whether any of these are problematic. We understand them to basically be, by way of information, communicating to us what their requirements consist of in this context. And so there's nothing there that's like a big wish list or something. It's just notification to the applicant that these are the things that are going to apply. So we're satisfied with the way this condition is structured, particularly with the clarification in what is now condition 13 of the stormwater management requirements. And those are similarly just a recitation of what your own public works code requires. So we think that's been made sufficiently clear, and we're satisfied with these conditions. The one thing I would like to add, and condition 14 we're seeing for the first time this evening, we're a little concerned that this requirement going forward, that the limitation right in, right out, that could be applied to the property in the future, that wouldn't necessarily need to be the case for all other potential land uses. So if there were in the future some other land use than a fuel station, there might not be a need for that restriction. We'd like to suggest that at the very end, the words with the same use be added. And in that case, I think it would be true that somebody else running a fuel station there would be subject to that limitation, but someone doing something completely different that has fewer turning movements shouldn't be subject to that restriction necessarily. So that's the only request we have on conditions of approval. All right. So as we turn to site development review, there's a two-track procedure in your code. The first procedure is called a Type 2. It's a staff review that doesn't need to come to your board, and it has a very well thought out set of design standards that are very specific about where buildings are to be located, what their proportion of windows is, and materials to be used, and so forth. And developments that can meet all of those standards can go very straightforwardly through a staff review procedure, and that's helpful in the interest of time and so forth. But your code also provides what's called a Type 3 procedure involving this public hearing. And when matters come to your board, the frame of reference is not the same. The frame of reference, or your direction in your code, is to determine whether there is compliance with the intent of the Downtown Canby Overlay Site and Design Review standards. And that's very different because it gives you a lot of discretion. In fact, it directs you to use your discretion to bridge the gaps, if you will, between what the very building-oriented design standards say and those types of uses that just don't involve buildings that way. The code is kind of silent, frankly, in the design standards about what do you do with a gas station. And I don't mean to say nobody ever thought about it, but it is the fact that in planning and zoning codes, it's literally not possible to think of all the possibilities that may come to your community in the future. And so the kind of discretion to look at the intent of these standards and decide accordingly gives you the tools that you need to uphold the base zoning and the uses that are allowed, and to meet the intent of the high-quality development in the Downtown Canby Overlay Zone. So I want to encourage you to do that. And where there are questions about the relevance or the applicability of different standards, I think you've got a lot of latitude to decide. Some just don't make sense in this context. They're not relevant, and we aren't going to try to make the gas station be 5 feet from the sidewalk. There's no good reason to do that. Finally, I think, Chairman Smith, a good illustration was your question about the signs. Because it's not clear when you have the kind of spandrel canopy cover that doesn't extend all the way to the ground. Well, how do you measure? What's the area to use as your basis for calculating signs? And I think that's a good example of just where that kind of reasonable discretion to look at the context and how to reasonably apply the standards comes into play in this forum. So with that, I think I would like to, you've seen an aerial photo. I think I'd like to turn the presentation over now to the design engineer, Jake Tate. Thank you.
All right. My name is Jake Tate with Great Basin Engineering. My address is 2010 North Redwood Road in Salt Lake City, Utah. And today I'll just walk you through the site plan. We'll try and make it as brief as possible and point out some of the main design features that went into this, and we'll get a little further into the site development standards and the design review guidelines. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. I'd be happy to do that and answer those for you. So you can see here we have on the site a 6-dispenser fuel center that we're proposing. Each dispenser has two fuel positions, one on either side. We have a canopy that will cover those. We have 2 underground fuel storage tanks in this area. We're providing a bike rack here per the city standards. There's a small public area here where we'll have a bench and a place where the public can have a moment of respite if they choose. We have a kiosk here that will encompass the mechanical equipment, the monitoring equipment for the underground fuel devices, and also some of the security equipment, and also a restroom for the employees. We have parking along the edge, a small storage shed for some of the merchandising that is sold, candy bars, windshield wiper fluid, that kind of stuff will be stored in this small shed, and also a dumpster enclosure. There's an infiltration pond in the corner for the stormwater, an air water pad, and that pretty much encompasses the main bit of the design for the site. Are there any questions on the site design? Yes.
So your restrooms are not going to be open to the public? Is that?
Typically they're not, that's correct.
Where's the commercial merchandise going to be sold out of again?
There is some areas under here where
Okay,
they will be covered under the canopy.
gotcha.
And the reason there was a request to change the language on one of the conditions to an average of 15 feet, is that because this corner here, it's rounded off, that at certain parts right on the corner there is not 15 feet?
No, we'll get into that further. We have a few slides that address that directly, if
Okay.
you don't mind waiting just a couple of minutes. Yes.
I was wondering about, you have one parking spot and one wheelchair access. You will probably have more than one employee there at that station, won't you?
Yes, that's true.
There should be added parking for them.
That's correct, but we do meet the city's parking regulation for this project. There is on-street parking on Second that exists where they can utilize that in its current configuration. And that's what we're anticipating, since we do meet the parking requirement. Any other questions?
Frankly, I'm concerned that the restrooms are only open, are private and not open to the public, considering people coming in and out of there all day long with little kids and things like that. That those little kids might want to use the restroom or something like that. Would that be?
Typically, it's not a marked restroom, so there's not a big sign that says
Okay.
restroom. But the employees, it's there for the employees so they can have one on the site. There are sites where it is open to the public, but typically we don't do that just because then there's a cleaning issue and a maintenance issue that gets involved there with people in and out. And since most people don't get out of their cars at fueling stations where this isn't a convenience store, it's just a fueling station, people getting out of their cars happens less than otherwise.
And I'm not sure it's entirely within something that we should necessarily be even commenting on whether the restroom is used for public or not, but I sort of surprised. I can't imagine building a gas station and not having a restroom available for the public. But I guess, maybe if that's not one of our approval criteria, that's none of our business, but I'm a little bit surprised.
Yeah, we do have stations where they are available to the public. This one hasn't been proposed that way at this time.
Is there a reason for that?
Just the maintenance issue, and just providing it for the employees. So, taking the site design into account, the requirements in the Canby Downtown Overlay can really be split into two types. The site development standards, which are kind of the backbone of your site, the setbacks, the height of the building position, parking, screening, items like that. And as pointed out in the staff report, we meet all of those requirements except for one. And that is it's kind of hard to see here actually. Maybe if you refer to your PowerPoint, you can see the stacking better. The 15-foot setback on the front landscape areas is what we're talking about here. And on your PowerPoint slides, you can see there is a stacking exhibit we put together. And this was at the design of our traffic engineer, Brent Aaron. And you'll notice there are 19 cars that are anticipated at this site during peak hours. And the configuration that they're in is based on the percentage that we anticipate coming into the site off of 99. There are a few here that are anticipated coming off of 2nd, but 16 or so of